A receipt. That's all it took. A single crisp piece of paper that unraveled a life woven from threads of love, luxury, and lies. For Catherine Rutherford, 7 months pregnant and nestled in the heart of a billion-dollar empire, that receipt wasn't just for a car. It was a death certificate for her marriage. This isn't just a story about cheating. It's a story of devastating betrayal, of a woman pushed to the edge, and the cold, calculated revenge she served to the man who thought he owned the world. Stay with us as we uncover how one woman's discovery brought a titan to his knees. The silence in the Rutherford penthouse was a specific kind of quiet, the sort that costs a fortune to create. It was a silence engineered by triple-paned, floor-to-ceiling windows that muted the roar of downtown Austin, a silence that hummed with the barely audible thrum of a climate control system, maintaining a perfect 72 degrees. For Catherine Vance Rutherford, this silence had once been a comfort, a serene backdrop to a life that had exceeded every dream. Now, it was suffocating. At 34, Catherine was the very picture of poised elegance. An architect by training, with a mind as sharp as the clean lines of the buildings she once designed, she had paused her career to embrace a different kind of creation. At 7 months pregnant, her body was a beautiful, burgeoning vessel of life, a constant, gentle reminder of the future she and her husband, Damien Rutherford, were building together. Damien. The name itself carried weight in the city. He was the charismatic wunderkind CEO of Helios Dynamics, a tech firm that had revolutionized renewable energy storage. He was a visionary, a deal maker, a man who moved through the world with the unshakable confidence of someone who had never been told no. He was handsome, doting, and until this morning, the center of Catherine's universe. Their life was a meticulously curated masterpiece. A sprawling penthouse overlooking Ladybird Lake, a weekend home in the hill country, a private jet on standby. They were a power couple, their faces gracing the society pages, their philanthropy a topic of conversation at every gala. Damien had given her everything: security, passion, a world dipped in gold, and she had given him her trust, absolute and unconditional. The day had started like any other. Damien had left before dawn, a quick kiss to her forehead and a murmured big meeting with the board. Catherine had her morning routine, prenatal yoga, a healthy breakfast prepared by their personal chef, and then a few hours in the nursery arranging and rearranging tiny clothes, her heart swelling with anticipation. The baby, a boy they had already named Julian, was a soft, fluttering presence within her, a secret conversation between mother and child. It was during her mid-morning tea that the silence began to feel sinister. She'd been scrolling through shared family photos on the master suite's integrated wall tablet, a sleek black screen that controlled everything from the lights to the security. She was looking for a photo from their baby moon in Santorini when she swiped past the photo gallery and into the shared document folder. It was mostly boring things: household invoices, travel itineraries, appliance warranties. But one file, synced from Damien's laptop just this morning, caught her eye. It wasn't the title that was alarming, but its starkness: vehicle purchase agreement, Austin Imports.pdf. Curiosity, innocent at first, pricked at her. Had Damien bought a new car? He hadn't mentioned it. He had a fleet of them already gleaming in their subterranean garage, a matte black Mercedes G-Wagon for him, a silver Tesla Model X for her, and a vintage Porsche 911 for his weekend follies. Another car seemed excessive. She tapped the file. It loaded with a crisp digital snap. Her eyes scanned the familiar letterhead of Austin's most exclusive luxury car dealership. The buyer's name was listed clearly, Damien L. Rutherford. Then her eyes fell to the vehicle description, and the first crack appeared in the foundation of her world. Model Maserati Ghibli SQ4, Gran Lusso. Exterior color Rosso Magma. Interior Nero, Pieno Fiore, natural leather, with Rosso stitching, Rosso Magma, molten red, a flashy, screaming look-at-me color. It was the absolute antithesis of Damien's usual taste, which ran towards sophisticated grays and deep presidential blues. This was a car for a different kind of person, a different kind of life. A cold knot tightened in Catherine's stomach. It was just a car. She was being silly. Hormonal Damien would probably say with a gentle, patronizing smile. But she couldn't shake the feeling of wrongness. She scrolled further down past the VIN, the options packages, the litany of fees. And then she saw it. The section that made the air leave her lungs in a painful gasp. Registered keeper information. Name: Ms. Isabella Rossi. Address: 4800 Riverway Drive, Unit 22B, Austin, TX 787X. Isabella Rossi. The name was a ghost, a whisper she'd heard before, but dismissed. A new associate at one of the venture capital firms Helios worked with. Damien had mentioned her innocently. Brilliant, a real shark, he'd said. Catherine had seen her once across a crowded room at a charity auction, a stunningly beautiful woman with a cascade of dark hair and a smile that could charm a snake. 4800 Riverway Drive. Catherine's hands trembled as she pulled up a new search window on the tablet. She knew the address. It was a new, obscenely luxurious, high-rise condominium complex, the kind of place that catered to single wealthy professionals, the kind of place that had a rooftop infinity pool and a 24-hour concierge. Her mind raced, connecting dots she hadn't even known existed. The late nights Damien had blamed on server crashes, the sudden unexplained business trips to New York that yielded no public announcements, the faint, unfamiliar scent of perfume on his suit jacket a few weeks ago, a floral note she'd mistaken for a colleague's at a dinner party. It all coalesced into a single, hideous image Damien. Her Damien buying a blood-red Maserati for this other woman. A gift, a trophy, a key to a life that ran parallel to theirs, hidden in the shadows. The purchase price was listed at the bottom of the page, a number that made her feel sick. 118,450. Paid in full. $118,000. Enough for a down payment on a house, enough to fund a child's entire college education. Spent on a toy for his mistress. The silence of the penthouse was no longer serene. It was the vacuum of space, cold and airless. The gentle flutter in her womb suddenly felt like a panicked bird trapped in a cage. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was about Julian. What kind of world was she bringing her son into? A world built on a foundation of lies. A legacy of deceit. Her first instinct was to scream, to shatter the expensive silence with a howl of rage and pain, to call Damien and demand an explanation, to hear him stammer and lie his way through it. But Catherine was an architect. She didn't demolish a building by swinging a random sledgehammer. She examined the blueprints, identified the structural weaknesses, and planned the demolition with cold, calculated precision. The rage was there, a white-hot fire in her chest. But beneath it, something else was crystallizing. A steely resolve. She would not be the weeping, hysterical wife. She would not be a victim in her own story. Damien had mistaken her gentleness for weakness. He had underestimated her. It was a mistake he was going to regret for the rest of his life. She stood up, her movements calm and deliberate. She walked from the master suite through the cavernous living room with its museum-quality art and into her home office. The room was her sanctuary, a space of order and logic, its walls lined with books on structural engineering and design theory. She sat at her sleek, minimalist desk and picked up her phone. Her hands were perfectly steady now. She didn't scroll to her husband's name. She didn't call her mother or her best friend. She opened a new search, her fingers tapping out a query with chilling purpose. Best divorce attorney in Austin. High-asset cases. A name appeared at the top of the list, accompanied by a string of accolades and 5-star reviews. Jasmine Kaur and Associates Law. The firm's tagline read, "Strategic advocacy, uncompromising integrity." Catherine looked at the photo of the lawyer. Jasmine Kaur had dark, intelligent eyes and a gaze that promised no nonsense. She looked like a woman who knew how to dismantle an empire. Catherine pressed the call button. The phone rang once, twice. "Kaur and Associates, how may I help you?" A crisp, professional voice answered. Catherine took a deep, steadying breath. The sound of her own voice was alien to her, devoid of the warmth it usually held. It was the voice of a woman who had just drawn a battle line. "Yes," she said, her tone as cold and hard as polished marble. "I need to schedule an immediate consultation with Miss Kaur. My name is Catherine Rutherford, and I believe my husband is about to learn the true meaning of the word liability." The offices of Kaur and Associates were located in a sleek, modern tower that felt a world away from the opulent warmth of Catherine's penthouse. The aesthetic was minimalist and sharp, concrete floors, glass walls, and stark black leather furniture. It was a space designed for clarity, not comfort. It was a war room. Jasmine Kaur was even more formidable in person. Dressed in a razor-sharp charcoal suit, she carried herself with an air of contained energy like a panther at rest. Her office overlooked the state capital, a view that spoke of power and influence. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Mrs. Rutherford, Catherine," she began, her voice calm but commanding as she gestured for Catherine to sit. "Your call was direct. Tell me everything. Start from the beginning and do not leave out a single detail, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant." Catherine, numb and operating on pure adrenaline, laid it all out. She spoke of her marriage, the shared dreams, the pregnancy. Her voice was even almost detached as she recounted finding the purchase agreement. She slid a printed copy across the polished mahogany desk. Jasmine picked it up, her eyes scanning the document with an unnerving speed. She lingered on the name Isabella Rossi and the paid-in-full stamp. Her expression remained neutral, but a flicker of something interest calculation danced in her dark eyes. "A Maserati," Jasmine murmured, placing the paper down. "Men are rarely subtle in their betrayals. They think with their egos, which makes them predictable." She leaned forward, her focus entirely on Catherine. "The car is the tip of the iceberg. I can guarantee you that. Our first step is to see the rest of the iceberg without letting him know we're looking." For the next 2 hours, Jasmine outlined the strategy. It was a masterclass in modern warfare, fought not with armies, but with subpoenas, forensic accountants, and private investigators. "You will go home, and you will act ipour, as if nothing has happened." Jasmine instructed, her tone leaving no room for argument. "You are the happy, glowing, expectant mother. You will be loving, you will be supportive. You will give him no reason to suspect that the ground beneath his feet is about to crumble. Your emotional control is our most powerful weapon right now. Can you do that? Catherine thought of her baby of the future she was now fighting for. Yes, she said the word, tasting like metal in her mouth. Good. Jasmine nodded, a hint of approval in her voice. Because while you are playing the part of the devoted wife, my team will be moving. We'll file the petition for divorce silently. We'll get a temporary restraining order on all marital assets effective the moment he is served. By the time he finds out what's happening, he'll be locked out of moving, selling, or hiding a single dollar. The plan was brutal and efficient. Jasmine's team would consist of a forensic accountant named Marcus Thorne, a man she described as a bloodhound for numbers, and a private investigator, a former FBI agent named David Chen. Their mission was to build an irrefutable case of infidelity and, more importantly, dissipation of marital assets. The 118-ton limit 450 for the Maserati was just the beginning. Jasmine was certain there was more. Catherine walked out of the law office, feeling hollowed out, and yet paradoxically filled with a grim sense of purpose. The role of a lifetime awaited her. That evening when Damien came home, the performance began. He breezed in, smelling of expensive cologne and the crisp night air, a wide smile on his handsome face. "Ellie, my love," he boomed, dropping his briefcase and enveloping her in a hug. She had to fight every instinct to recoil. She forced herself to relax into his embrace, to inhale his scent without flinching. She tilted her head up for his kiss, a practiced gesture of affection that now felt like a venomous bite. "How was the board meeting, darling?" she asked, her voice a perfect imitation of wifely concern. "A triumph," he declared, pulling away to look down at her belly. He placed a hand on it, a gesture of paternal pride that now seemed grotesquely theatrical. "We secured another round of funding that will make your head spin. Julian is going to have the world at his feet." The irony was so thick she could have choked on it. He spoke of their son's future while actively sabotaging it. The rage simmered, but she pushed it down, channeling Jasmine's instructions. "Emotional control is our weapon." The next 2 weeks were a special kind of hell. Catherine lived a double life, a spy in her own home. By day, she received encrypted updates from Jasmine's team. By night, she played her part, attending galas on Damien's arm, smiling for cameras discussing nursery color schemes, and enduring his touch. Each kiss was a betrayal, each "I love you," a lie that echoed in the silent penthouse. Meanwhile, Marcus Thorne, the forensic accountant, was unearthing a tangled web of deceit. He had gained access to years of credit card statements and bank records. The findings were staggering. It wasn't just a car. There was a lease on the luxury condominium at 4800 Riverway Drive, paid for 6 months in advance, from a private account Catherine never knew existed. There were charges from Cartier for a diamond tennis bracelet she had never seen, receipts from exclusive restaurants for intimate dinners for 2, first-class flights to New York Aspen, even a weekend trip to Paris, all booked for Mr. Damien Rutherford and Ms. Isabella Rossi. Damien wasn't just having an affair. He was funding a complete parallel life. The total dissipation of assets Marcus had tracked so far was approaching $500,000. Each discovery was another stab wound, but Catherine absorbed the pain and filed it away as ammunition. The private investigator David Chen provided the visual confirmation. He sent a secure file to Catherine's phone. With trembling hands, she opened it. The photos were grainy, taken from a distance, but unmistakable. Damien and Isabella laughing as they got into the Rosso Magma Maserati. Damien, his arm wrapped possessively around her waist as they entered the condominium building. A picture of them kissing on a park bench, backlit by the setting sun. A picture of such casual intimacy that it shattered what was left of Catherine's heart. She stared at the photos, the face of her husband twisted in affection for another woman. The betrayal was no longer an abstract concept, a name on a piece of paper. It was real. It was visceral. Jasmine called a meeting. "We have enough," she said, her voice tight with satisfaction. "We have the affair. We have the dissipation of assets. We can move now. We'll have him served at his office tomorrow morning." The day of the serving was the longest of Catherine's life. She stayed home, her phone clutched in her hand, waiting. At 10:05 a.m., she received a simple text from Jasmine. "Done." The explosion was immediate. Her phone rang Damien's name, flashing on the screen. She ignored it. It rang again, and again. Then came the barrage of texts, each more frantic than the last. "Ellie, call me now. There's been a horrible mistake. My accounts are frozen. What is going on?" "This is insane. You can't be serious." "A divorce. Is this about the car?" "I can explain everything. Don't do this, Catherine." She read the messages, a cold satisfaction washing over her. The predictable path of a narcissist, caught in a lie-denial confusion, feigned innocence, and finally an attempt at explanation. He came home that evening like a hurricane. He burst through the door, his face a mask of fury, his charisma gone, replaced by a raw, ugly rage. "Catherine!" he roared, his voice bouncing off the marble floors. She was waiting for him in the living room, sitting calmly on the white sofa, a glass of water in her hand. She looked at him, her expression unreadable. "What the hell is this?" he demanded, waving a sheaf of legal papers in his hand. "A restraining order. You froze our assets. Are you out of your mind?" "Our assets," she replied, her voice dangerously quiet. "You mean the assets you've been so generously spending on Isabella Rossi?" His face went pale. The blustering anger deflated, replaced by a flicker of panic. He fell back on his most trusted tactic, gaslighting. "Isabella is a business colleague," he stammered, his eyes darting around the room, unable to meet hers. "The car was a company vehicle, a bonus for a major deal she helped close. You're pregnant, Ellie. Your hormones are making you paranoid. You're blowing this completely out of proportion." Catherine almost laughed. It was a pathetic textbook defense. She slowly stood up, her pregnant belly, a shield between them. "A company vehicle registered in her name, paid for, from a secret account," she asked, her voice rising with each question. "And the apartment, Damien? Is that a company condo? The Cartier bracelet, the trips to Paris, were those all business expenses too?" The blood drained from his face. He finally understood. She didn't just suspect. She knew. "Catherine, listen to me," he said, his voice dropping, attempting a tone of placating reason. "We can work this out. Don't throw away everything we have. Think about Julian." "Oh, I am thinking about Julian." She shot back the fire she had suppressed for weeks, finally igniting. "I'm thinking about what kind of man I want him to look up to. And it's not a liar. It's not a cheat. And it's certainly not a coward who builds his empire on deceit and thinks a woman's love is something he can just buy and sell." She walked past him towards her office. "You will speak to my lawyer from now on," she said, her voice ringing with finality. "My real lawyer, not the sycophants on your payroll who told you this was a good idea. Get your things. You have 1 hour to leave my home." He stood there, stunned into silence, the legal papers hanging limply from his hand. The great Damien Rutherford, the visionary, The titan of industry looked small and utterly defeated in the vast, silent penthouse he thought he owned. The war had begun, and Catherine Rutherford had just won the first decisive battle. But she knew, with a chilling certainty, that the fight for her future was far from over. Damien would not go down this easily. Isabella Rossi lived her life in a state of curated bliss. At 29, she had achieved a level of success and luxury that most people only dreamed of. Her apartment at the Riverway was a sanctuary of modern design with breathtaking views of the Austin skyline. Her closet was filled with designer clothes, her refrigerator with champagne, and her garage housed a brand-new magma-red Maserati that purred like a jungle cat. She owed it all to Damien Rutherford. To Isabella, Damien wasn't a villain, he was her savior. She had been an ambitious but struggling associate at a cutthroat venture capital firm when they met. He had seen her potential, her fire. He'd mentored her, championed her, and eventually seduced her. He had painted a tragic picture of his marriage. It was a sham, he'd told her, a business arrangement with a woman who was cold, emotionally distant, and career-obsessed. He claimed they hadn't shared a bed in years and were only staying together for appearances to protect the carefully constructed image of Helios dynamics. "She doesn't understand me, Bella," he would say, his voice thick with manufactured sorrow as they lay in the bed he paid for. "Not like you do. You're the one I want to build a future with." Isabella, blinded by his charisma and the intoxicating lifestyle he offered, believed every word. She saw herself not as a mistress, but as the rightful queen-in-waiting. The Maserati wasn't a toy, it was a promise. The apartment wasn't a cage, it was their future home. She was in love, desperately and foolishly. Her perfect world shattered on a Tuesday afternoon. She was returning from a spa day feeling relaxed and radiant when she saw him. A man in a nondescript sedan parked across the street from her building, holding a long-lens camera. She felt a prickle of unease. Paparazzi. Had her relationship with Damien finally leaked? A part of her was thrilled by the idea. The next day, her world truly imploded. Her key fob to the building's private garage was declined. An error, she assumed. But when her key to the apartment itself also failed, a cold dread washed over her. The concierge, a man who usually greeted her with a fawning smile, looked at her with pity. "I'm sorry, Ms. Rossi," he said, avoiding her eyes. "There's an issue with the lease. You'll need to contact the owner of record." Frantic, she called Damien. It went straight to voicemail. She called again. Voicemail. She sent a flurry of panicked texts. No reply. This was unlike him. He always answered her calls. She was standing on the curb, her mind racing, when a black town car pulled up. The tinted rear window slid down, revealing a woman whose face she recognized from society blogs and magazine articles. It was Catherine Rutherford, the cold, distant wife. But the woman looking at her was not cold. Her gaze was like a laser beam, intense and analytical, and she was very, very pregnant. This was a detail Damien had conveniently omitted. "Isabella Rossi?" Catherine asked, her voice calm and even. There was no hint of hysteria, no sign of a woman scorned. This was far more terrifying. Isabella could only nod her throat, suddenly dry. "I think you and I need to talk," Catherine said. It wasn't a request. "Get in the car." Against her better judgment, Isabella complied, sliding into the cool leather interior. The car pulled away from the curb, a silent, moving bubble of tension. "What is this?" Isabella finally managed, her voice trembling slightly. Where is Damien? Damien is currently dealing with the consequences of his actions, Catherine replied, her eyes fixed on Isabella. As I'm afraid, are you? The lease on your apartment has been terminated. The title on your Maserati is being contested as a fraudulent transfer of a marital asset. The credit cards you've been using will be declined by the end of the hour. Isabella stared at her, horrified. You can't do that. I can, and I have, Catherine stated simply. My husband, our husband, I suppose one could say, used marital funds to purchase your loyalty. That makes you a party to his fraud. I'm giving you a choice. You can be a witness or you can be a defendant. It's up to you. The carefully constructed fantasy Isabella had been living in crumbled into dust. The tragic, lonely husband, the loveless marriage, it was all a lie. She was not the queen in waiting. She was a casualty, a pawn in a rich man's game. Humiliation washed over her, hot and bitter. He told me you were separated. She whispered the words, tasting like ash. He said you didn't want children. Catherine's mask of composure finally cracked. A flicker of genuine pain crossed her face, so raw and real that it stunned Isabella. He said what? And then the story spilled out of Isabella. Not just the lies about the marriage, but the promises for the future, the most damning of which made Catherine's blood run cold. He was setting up a trust. Isabella said, tears now streaming down her face. She was no longer a glamorous mistress, but a heartbroken, terrified young woman. A private one offshore. He said it was for us, for our future, for the children he wanted to have with me. Catherine felt the air get knocked out of her. This wasn't just infidelity. This wasn't just spending money. This was a calculated long-term plan to replace her, to erase her and the child she was carrying. He had been building a new dynasty while pretending to nurture the one they had. It was a level of sociopathic cruelty she could scarcely comprehend. The architect in her mind took over again, processing this new devastating piece of information, not as a wife, but as a strategist, an offshore trust. That was a whole new level of financial malfeasance. Catherine's demeanor shifted. The personal pain was packed away, replaced by the cold fury of a general who had just been handed the enemy's battle plans. This trust, Catherine said, her voice sharp. Do you have any documentation? An account number? A bank name? Anything at all? Isabella. Desperate now to salvage anything from the wreckage of her life, nodded frantically. He was careless. He left a file open on his tablet one night when he stayed over. I saw it. A bank in the Cayman Islands. A name. The Theseus Trust. The Theseus Trust. The name was a sick joke, a reference to the paradox of the ship that is replaced piece by piece until none of the original remains. That's what Damien intended to do to their family. Replace her, replace their child, and sail on as if nothing had changed. Catherine's driver was already pulling up to the curb a few blocks from the riverway. She looked at the woman beside her, a woman she should have hated, and felt a sliver of pity. They were both victims of the same man's boundless ego. My lawyer will be in touch, Catherine said, her voice softer now, but no less firm. She will grant you immunity from civil prosecution in exchange for a sworn affidavit and your full cooperation. Tell her everything, especially about the Theseus Trust. Isabella nodded, wiping her eyes. What will happen to him? Catherine looked out the window, her gaze distant and hard. Damien built an empire. He seems to have forgotten that I am an architect. I know exactly where the load-bearing walls are, and I'm about to take them all out. The town car door opened. Isabella stumbled out onto the sidewalk, a ghost in her own life, left with nothing but the truth. As the car pulled away, Catherine placed a protective hand on her belly. The conversation with Isabella had been a gut punch, but it had also given her the ultimate weapon. This was no longer just a divorce. Damien hadn't just broken their vows, he had likely broken federal law. He had funneled marital and quite possibly corporate assets into an illegal offshore account to defraud his wife and child. She called Jasmine Kaur. "Jasmine," she said, her voice humming with a new dangerous energy. "Change of plans. Marcus Thorne needs to stop looking at credit card bills and start looking for an offshore ghost. I have a name for him, the Theseus Trust. I think our high-asset divorce case is about to become a federal criminal investigation." The discovery of the Theseus Trust changed the entire landscape of the battle. The case escalated from a messy, albeit high-stakes divorce into something far more serious. Jasmine Kaur brought in a team of forensic accountants who specialized in international finance. The work was slow and painstaking, a delicate dance of legal requests and digital archaeology, peeling back layers of shell corporations and encrypted ledgers. While the accountants hunted for ghost money in the Caymans, Damien's legal team launched a counter-offensive. They were a pack of slick, expensive lawyers from a top corporate firm, and they came out swinging. They filed motions to have the asset freeze lifted, claiming it was causing irreparable harm to Helios Dynamics. They painted Catherine as a vindictive hormonal woman, manipulated by an aggressive lawyer, attempting to extort a settlement far beyond what she was due. Damien Bard from the penthouse had taken up residence in a suite at the Four Seasons. He began a quiet but vicious smear campaign against Catherine. He told friends and business associates that she was mentally unstable, that the pregnancy had unhinged her. He was the victim, a loving husband blindsided by his wife's irrationality. Some people believed him. Invitations to social events dried up for Catherine. Former friends now offered her looks of pity or avoided her gaze altogether. The isolation was painful, but it only hardened her resolve. She spent her days in a self-imposed exile, surrounded by blueprints and legal documents. She pored over every piece of evidence. Jasmine's team uncovered her architect's mind, seeing patterns others might miss. The timelines of the offshore transfers, the creation of the trust, it all correlated with specific milestones in Helios Dynamics' growth. One rainy afternoon, as she was cross-referencing dates from the trust's formation with Damien's old calendars, a memory sparked. It was from the very beginning, before the penthouse, before the private jets, before Helios Dynamics was even a name. They had been living in a small rented bungalow near the university, both of them working insane hours. He was the brilliant engineer with a revolutionary idea for battery technology. She was a graduate student in architecture, but her passion for systems and efficiency extended beyond buildings. She remembered the nights spent at their kitchen table, covered in his complex equations and her structural diagrams. He would hit a wall with his energy transfer algorithms, and she, with her fresh perspective, would see a solution. She'd sketch out flowcharts, treating the energy transfer like a traffic system within a city, designing more efficient pathways. "You see things differently, Ellie," he used to say, his eyes wide with admiration. "You make the chaos make sense." Her contribution had been informal, the loving support of a partner. She never asked for credit. His success was their success. Or so she had thought. A sudden, chilling idea took root in her mind. She went to the back of a closet to a set of sealed storage boxes filled with her old university projects and notes. She hadn't looked at them in years. With trembling hands, she broke the tape on a box labeled Arch GRADP Projects and started digging. Beneath her thesis on sustainable urban design and rolls of old blueprints, she found it. A worn black moleskin notebook. Its pages were filled with her handwriting and diagrams from that specific period. And there, scrawled across a dozen pages, were the very same energy flow management schematics that she recognized as the core of Helios Dynamics' patented technology. There were dates on the pages, email printouts stapled to the inside cover, correspondence between her and Damien, where they discussed these exact concepts. She had designed the foundation, the foundational logic of his billion-dollar company, the very intellectual property upon which the entire empire was built, hadn't just been his idea. It had been theirs. She sank to the floor, the notebook clutched in her hands. The scope of his betrayal was staggering. He hadn't just cheated on her, lied to her, and tried to replace her. He had stolen the fruits of her intellect and built his kingdom on them, leaving her name off every patent, every document, every chapter of the story. He had erased her from her own creation. This changed everything. This wasn't just about her right to half of the marital assets. This was about her right to a foundational stake in the company itself. When she called Jasmine Core, her voice was eerily calm. "I need you and Marcus and David to come to the penthouse immediately and bring a specialist in intellectual property law." The emergency meeting took place in Catherine's home office. The IP lawyer, a sharp-eyed man named Ben Carter, examined the moleskin notebook as if it were a holy relic. He compared her diagrams with Helios Dynamics' core patents, which he had pulled up on his laptop. "It's here," Carter said, his voice filled with a quiet awe. "The foundational logic, the system architecture. It's rudimentary, of course, but the core principles that the 415 patent is based on are undeniably sketched out in this notebook. In your hand." He looked at Catherine. "Mrs. Rutherford, did you ever sign a non-disclosure agreement or any document assigning intellectual property rights to your husband or the company?" "No," Catherine said. "I was his partner, his wife. It never occurred to me that I needed to." Jasmine Core leaned forward, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across her face. It was the smile of a predator that had just seen its prey walk into a perfectly laid trap. "Damien's lawyers are arguing that you are a vindictive spouse trying to extort money from their client," Jasmine said. "They're about to find out you're not a spouse. You're a co-founder, an uncredited, defrauded co-founder who is owed a hell of a lot more than half a condo and a stock portfolio." The strategy pivoted once again. They were no longer just suing for divorce. They were launching a multi-pronged assault. First, the divorce proceedings, now bolstered by the irrefutable evidence of the Theseus Trust, which Marcus Thorne had finally cracked open, revealing nearly $5 million siphoned from company accounts. This was not just dissipation of marital assets, it was embezzlement and wire fraud. Second, a new separate lawsuit filed by Ben Carter on Catherine's behalf against Helios Dynamics itself. The suit claimed foundational intellectual property theft, demanding retroactive recognition of her co-founder status and a corresponding equity stake in the company, plus damages. The 1-2 punch was devastating. When Damien and his legal team were served with the new lawsuit, the panic was palpable. Their narrative of the unstable, greedy wife was instantly obliterated. The evidence was undeniable. The moleskin notebook was their smoking gun. The Helios Dynamics board of directors, who had previously stood by their star CEO, was now in open revolt. Their visionary leader was not only an embezzler, but potentially a fraud who had built their company on stolen IP. Their stock price, which had been Damien's obsession, began to tremble. Damien was cornered. He was facing a catastrophic divorce, a shareholder rebellion, and potential federal charges. His empire was crumbling, and the architect of his destruction was the very woman he had tried to erase. He tried to reach her, sending desperate, pleading emails. He even showed up at the penthouse, violating the restraining order, only to be met by a stoic security guard who threatened to call the police. Finally, the call came not from Damien, but from his lead lawyer. He was requesting a settlement conference. It was the legal equivalent of a white flag of surrender. Catherine sat with her team in Jasmine Corr's conference room, the Austin skyline glittering behind her. She was no longer just the wife. She was the woman who held all the cards. "They're scared," Jasmine said, looking at Catherine. "They will offer you a fortune to make this all go away quietly. But it's your call. We can take this to trial. We can burn him to the ground." Catherine looked down at her hands resting on her now prominent belly. The baby kicked a strong, reassuring movement. Burning Damien to the ground was tempting. The rage inside her still craved it. But she was a builder, not a demolisher. She didn't want rubble. She wanted a foundation. A new one for her and for her son. "I don't want to burn him down," she said, her voice clear and strong. "I want to buy him out." The settlement conference was held on neutral ground in a sprawling, soulless conference room at a downtown law firm. The air was thick with tension. On one side of the massive mahogany table sat Damien and his 3 lawyers, their faces grim. Damien looked haggard. The confident swagger was gone, replaced by a pallor of exhaustion and defeat. He refused to look at Catherine. On the other side sat Catherine, flanked by her legal team, Jasmine Corr, the warrior, Marcus Thorne, the numbers man, David Chen, the shadow, and Ben Carter, the IP expert. Catherine was the picture of calm authority, dressed in a simple but elegant maternity dress of deep navy blue. She radiated a power that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with truth. Damien's lead attorney, a portly man named Gerald Finch, cleared his throat and began. He spoke of wanting to resolve this unfortunate family matter amicably, of protecting the legacy of Helios Dynamics, of ensuring the privacy of all parties. He made an offer, a cash settlement of $50 million, the penthouse, the hill country home, and full ownership of her Tesla, all in exchange for a sealed agreement and her complete relinquishment of any and all claims to Helios Dynamics. It was a staggering sum, a king's ransom. A year ago it would have been unimaginable. Jasmine Corr listened patiently until he finished. Then she simply said, "No." Finch blinked. "I beg your pardon. My client is not interested in a golden parachute," Jasmine said, her voice cutting through the stale air. "She's not leaving the company. She helped build it." Ben Carter then took the floor methodically and dispassionately, laying out the case for Catherine's foundational intellectual property contribution. He presented enlarged copies of the diagrams from her moleskin notebook alongside the company's core patents. The visual evidence was damning and irrefutable. Then Marcus Thorne stepped up. He detailed the forensic accounting of the Theseus Trust, tracing the flow of millions of dollars from Helios Dynamics accounts into the offshore trust. He explained that a full report was ready to be delivered to the SEC and the U.S. Attorney's Office, detailing wire fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. A muscle twitched in Damien's jaw. His lawyers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Finally, Catherine spoke. Her voice, when it came, was not filled with rage or bitterness, but with a chilling, surgical precision. "You didn't just have an affair, Damien," she said, looking at him directly for the first time, forcing him to meet her gaze. "You tried to erase me. You took my work, my contributions, and you built your name on them while planning to discard me and our child. You didn't want a partner. You wanted an audience. And when I was no longer convenient, you decided to replace me piece by piece." She let the words hang in the air. $50 million is not the price of my silence. It's not the price of my contribution. It is frankly an insult. She slid a single sheet of paper across the table. It was her offer, her terms. They were simple and brutal. 1. Damien would immediately resign as CEO of Helios Dynamics, citing personal reasons. 2. He would transfer 40% of his 60% ownership stake in the company directly to Catherine. This would make her the majority shareholder. 3. The remaining 20% of his shares would be placed in an irrevocable trust for their son Julian, to be managed by Catherine until he turned 25. 4. Damien would be left with nothing. No shares, no golden parachute, no severance. He could keep his vintage Porsche and his personal effects. 5. In exchange, Catherine would not pursue private legal action related to the embezzlement, and the divorce would be finalized quietly. The sworn affidavit from Isabella Rossi and the forensic report on the trust would remain sealed contingent on his full and immediate compliance. Damien's lawyer, Finch, stared at the paper, his face ashen. This is absurd. You're trying to take his entire life's work." "No," Catherine corrected him calmly. "I'm taking back my life's work. He can go and build another one." Damien finally snapped. "You can't do this, Catherine." He snarled, his voice cracking. "I made you. I gave you everything." Catherine stood up, her regal calm unshaken. She placed a hand on her belly. "You gave me nothing that I didn't already have, Damien. You just put a price tag on it. And you gave me the one thing that matters most." She looked down at her bump. "You gave me my son, and for his sake I am securing his legacy, the one you tried to steal." She looked at her team. "We're done here." They rose as one and walked out of the room, leaving Damien and his lawyers to stare at the single sheet of paper that represented the total annihilation of his world. They had no choice. A public trial would mean shareholder lawsuits that would bankrupt the company and almost certain jail time for Damien. They accepted her terms within the hour. The aftermath was swift and quiet. Damien Rutherford, the titan of Austin Tech, resigned. The official story was that he was stepping back to focus on his family after a difficult divorce. The tech blogs buzzed for a week, and then the world moved on. Catherine Vance Rutherford was appointed interim CEO by the board, a move that stunned the industry, but was unanimously supported by the shareholders who had been briefed on the true situation. She proved to be more than capable. Her vision was clear, her leadership decisive. She wasn't the charismatic showman Damien had been, but she was a brilliant strategist and a builder. She restructured the company, promoted deserving talent, and established a new culture of transparency and integrity. Isabella Rossi, having provided her affidavit, disappeared. Catherine had ensured she received a small anonymous settlement from the recovered trust funds, enough to start over somewhere new. A gesture of grace for a woman who was in the end just another one of Damien's victims. 3 months after the settlement, Catherine gave birth to a healthy baby boy, Julian Vance. She dropped the Rutherford from her name and from his. 1 year later, Catherine stood in a bright, airy office space in a newly renovated downtown building. It was the headquarters of her new passion project, the Vance Foundation, funded by Helios Dynamics' soaring profits. The foundation's mission was to support and fund female entrepreneurs in science and technology. On the wall behind her desk was a framed diagram, the first schematic she had ever drawn in that old moleskin notebook. Her son Julian, now a babbling toddler, played on a colorful mat at her feet. She looked down at him, her heart filled with a fierce, profound love. The pain of Damien's betrayal would likely never vanish completely, but it no longer defined her. It was just a part of her story, the fire that had forged her into the woman she was, now a mother, a CEO, a philanthropist, a builder. She had lost a husband, a fantasy, a life she thought she wanted. But in the wreckage, she had found something far more valuable herself. She had faced the ultimate betrayal and had not only survived but thrived, building a new, better world on the foundations of a ruined one. And that was a legacy worth fighting for. Catherine's story is a powerful reminder that the deepest betrayals can sometimes lead to our greatest transformations. She turned a devastating discovery into a declaration of independence, proving that strength isn't about the absence of pain, but about what you choose to build from its ashes. She didn't just get revenge. She reclaimed her past, secured her future, and built a legacy of integrity for her son. Her story is a testament to resilience, strategy, and the unyielding power of a woman who knows her worth. What did you think of Catherine's final move? Was it justice, or was it a cold-blooded takeover? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. He was a Wall Street titan, a kingmaker, who moved markets with a whisper. She was his beautiful, pregnant wife, the perfect ornament to his gilded life. But when billionaire Julian Croft woke up one morning and decided to freeze his wife Elara's bank accounts, leaving her penniless and trapped in their Fifth Avenue penthouse, he made a fatal mistake. He thought he was caging a songbird, but he had actually cornered a lioness. What he didn't know was that Elara's old money family hadn't just given her a dowry. They had given her a weapon. This is the story of how a woman with nothing but a secret phone call and a forgotten trust fund systematically dismantled a financial empire to save herself and her unborn child. The air in the penthouse was always the same, a sterile, climate-controlled 72 degrees, tinged with the faint, expensive scent of white tea and lilies that Julian Croft insisted upon. From their perch on the 80th floor, overlooking Central Park, New York City, was a silent, glittering tapestry. For Elara Croft, it was the most beautiful prison in the world. Her life to an outsider was a fantasy. At 28, she was married to Julian Croft, the 40-year-old enfant terrible of Wall Street. His firm, Croft Consolidated, was a leviathan swallowing smaller companies with a rapaciousness that the Financial Times called both terrifying and brilliant. Their life was a curated series of triumphs, galas at the Met summers, in their sprawling Hamptons estate, and impulsive trips to Milan for a weekend of shopping. Julian draped her in Graf diamonds and Hermès crocodile not as gifts, but as branding. She was the Elara Croft, the flawless accessory to his monumental success. This morning, however, a secret joy warmed her, a feeling entirely her own. She sat on the edge of their vast, custom-made bed, the silk sheets pooling around her ankles. In her hand was a positive pregnancy test. 2 stark blue lines. A baby. Their baby. For months she had felt a creeping hollowness, a sense of being an exquisite ghost in her own life. But this This was real. This was substance. She waited for Julian to finish his morning routine, a brutal session with his personal trainer, a cold plunge, and then 30 minutes of uninterrupted market analysis on a bank of 8 monitors in his home office. He emerged precisely at 7:30 a.m., knotting a silk tie from Charvet. He was handsome in a severe, sculpted way, his dark hair tinged with a distinguished grey at the temples. He didn't smile. He approved. "You're glowing," he stated, his eyes scanning her as if assessing a stock price. It wasn't a compliment. It was an observation of an asset's condition. "Julian, I have something to tell you." Elara said, her voice trembling slightly. She held out the test. He took it, his expression unreadable. He stared at the 2 blue lines for a long moment. Elara's heart hammered against her ribs. She had pictured this moment 1,000 times. Tears, a tender embrace, whispers of excitement. Julian's gaze lifted from the test and met hers. A strange proprietary light flickered in his eyes. "All right," he said, his tone the same as when he closed a multi-billion-dollar merger. "We'll need to make adjustments. The trip to Aspen is off. Your obstetrician will be Dr. Helen Chang at Mount Sinai. I'll have my assistant schedule a full workup. We'll convert the west wing of the Hamptons house into a nursery. I'll handle the designer." He hadn't said congratulations. He hadn't touched her. He had simply started issuing directives. The warmth inside her chilled. "I was thinking..." She began wanting to suggest her own childhood doctor, to talk about names to share the moment. Elara, he cut her off, his voice soft, but edged with steel. "I know what's best. We can't leave anything to chance now. This baby, it's a Croft. It's my legacy. Everything has to be perfect." He placed the test on the marble nightstand as if it were a finalized contract, gave her a perfunctory kiss on the forehead, and left for the office. The scent of his Tom Ford cologne lingered, suffocating her. The joy she had felt just minutes before curdled into a familiar dread. It wasn't their baby. It was his legacy. She was merely the vessel. The next 2 weeks were a blur of appointments Julian's office had scheduled. Nutritionists, wellness coaches, a consultation with Dr. Chang, where Julian did most of the talking, outlining the optimal prenatal strategy. He vetted and fired their chef for using non-organic kale. He installed a new air purification system. His control, always a suffocating blanket, was now a straitjacket. The breaking point came on a Tuesday. Elara was having lunch with her 2 friends, the only 2 from her pre-Julian life she was still allowed to see. She'd insisted on a small, discreet restaurant in Soho, away from the usual prying eyes of their social set. The bill came, and Elara, as she always did, handed the waiter her black Amex card. Julian insisted she use it. It was, he said, unlimited. The waiter returned his face a mask of embarrassment. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Croft. It's been declined." A flush of heat crept up Elara's neck. "That's impossible. Could you try it again?" He did. Declined again. "It says the account holder has suspended the card." Her friends exchanged awkward glances. The humiliation was a physical blow. She fumbled in her purse for another card, a Visa debit card linked to her personal savings account, a small fund she'd had since college. Declined. A frantic cold sweat broke out on her skin. She excused herself to the restroom and tried to log into her mobile banking app. Access denied. Please contact your primary account holder. The primary account holder was Julian. He had frozen everything, every scent. He had cut her off completely without a word of warning. She stumbled back to the table, her face pale. One of her friends quietly paid the bill. The pity in her eyes was almost worse than the shame. When she got back to the penthouse, the silence was deafening. She waited for hours. Julian returned late, well after 11 p.m. He walked into the living room, loosening his tie, his face impassive. "Julian?" she said, her voice shaking with a mixture of rage and fear. "My cards were declined today." He didn't feign surprise. He simply placed his briefcase on the coffee table. "Yes. I had them suspended." "You... what? Why?" "Without even telling me, Alara, you're pregnant." "Now," he said, his tone infuriatingly calm, as if explaining a simple concept to a child. "Your health and the health of my heir are my top priority. That means no more frivolous lunches, no more unauthorized trips, no more stress. From now on, anything you need, food, clothing, transport, will be arranged by my staff. You just need to ask. It's for your own good. It's safer this way." She stared at him, the full, horrifying reality of her situation crashing down on her. He hadn't just frozen her accounts. He had formalized her status as his property. She was a prisoner. Her world shrunk to the dimensions of this penthouse, her every need subject to his approval. She was pregnant, vulnerable, and utterly, totally dependent on a man who saw her not as a wife, but as an incubator. "You can't do this," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "I already have," he replied, turning toward his office. "It's all taken care of." As he walked away, a cold, hard fury began to replace her fear. He thought he had taken everything. He thought he had won. But Julian Croft, for all his market analysis and strategic genius, had made one colossal miscalculation. He knew all about Alara Croft, his trophy wife. But he knew nothing about Alara Vance, the granddaughter of Arthur Vance, a man who believed that true power was never seen until it was used. And in the back of a dusty safe in her childhood bedroom, 1,000 miles away, lay a set of documents her grandfather had given her years ago, a weapon forged in old money and secret clauses waiting for this exact moment. The first 24 hours were a masterclass in psychological warfare. Julian's control was absolute and suffocatingly polite. A new chef, approved by his nutritionist, prepared meals that were bland, virtuous, and served at precise times. If Alara wanted to leave the apartment, she had to give 12 hours' notice so that a driver and a security guard, ostensibly for her protection, could be arranged. Every request was filtered through Julian's ever-present personal assistant, a brisk woman named Cynthia, whose loyalty was clearly to the man who signed her 6-figure paycheck. Alara played the part he had assigned her. She was docile, defeated, and fragile. She stayed in bed late, picked at her food, and shed quiet tears where she knew the maids would see them. She let Julian believe he had broken her. Inside, however, the fear had crystallized into something cold, sharp, and diamond-hard resolve. Her baby would not be born into this cage. Her child would not be raised as a pawn in Julian Croft's dynastic ambitions. On the third night, she waited until the rhythmic, deep breathing from Julian's side of the bed told her he was asleep. Slipping out from under the heavy duvet, she crept into her dressing room, a vast space larger than most New York apartments. She closed the heavy oak door, the click of the latch deafeningly loud in the silence. She didn't turn on the lights. Kneeling, she ran her hand along the back of the walk-in closet, behind a row of couture gowns she hadn't worn in years. Her fingers found the nearly invisible seam of a wall safe. Julian knew about this safe. He'd had it installed. It held the Graf diamond necklace he'd given her for their first anniversary, and a few other ostentatious pieces. He knew the combination their wedding date. He checked it periodically. But what he didn't know was that Elara had paid the installer an extra $5,000 in cash, back when she had cash to build a smaller secondary biometric locked compartment inside the main safe. She pressed her thumb against a hidden sensor. A tiny section of the velvet-lined wall popped open with a faint hiss. Inside was not jewelry, but a single worn leather folio and a cheap burner phone she had bought for cash 2 years ago and never used. She took them out, her hands trembling. She sat on the floor, the glow of the city filtering through the window, and opened the folio. The paper was thick, creamy, and embossed with the letterhead of a discreet, centuries-old law firm in Geneva, Switzerland, Fontaine and Chen. Inside were the founding documents of something called the Odysseus Trust. The memory washed over her. Her 21st birthday. It wasn't a lavish party. It was a quiet dinner with her grandfather, Arthur Vance. Arthur was old money, old industry, old everything. His family had made their fortune in shipping and logistics long before income tax was a certainty. He was a quiet, formidable man with pale blue eyes that saw everything. While her parents were dazzled by Julian's new money flash, Arthur had always been reserved, his approval conspicuously absent. That night he had slid the leather folio across the table. "This is for you, Elara," he'd said. "Not from me, but for me. It is a provision." "A trust fund?" she had asked naively. He'd given a rare, thin smile. "Of a sort. It is a silent partner. You will not touch it. You will not speak of it. You will, for all intents and purposes, forget it exists. The men who manage it at Fontaine and Chen are the sons of the men who worked for my father. Their loyalty is to the Vances, not to a balance sheet." She remembered flipping through the dense legal jargon. The trust had been seeded with a modest amount from his estate, but the portfolio was aggressive, global, and utterly opaque. She was the sole beneficiary. But it was one particular section, Article 3, Section 4b, that he had tapped with a long, bony finger. "Pay attention to this," he'd warned, his voice low. "This clause is your parachute, your sword, and your shield. It is triggered by a spousal act of financial coercion or bad faith. If any man-husband specifically uses financial control to imprison you, this clause activates. The trust is no longer a passive investment vehicle. It becomes an active agent on your behalf. It will be your bank, your army, and your lawyer." But Elara, he had fixed her with his intense gaze. "You only pull this trigger once. It is not a warning shot. It is a declaration of war." At 21, blissfully single and idealistic, she had thought him eccentric, a relic of a bygone era of ruthless patriarchs and arranged marriages. Now, sitting on the cold floor of her dressing room, she realized her grandfather hadn't been eccentric. He had been prophetic. He had seen a potential for vulnerability in her that she had been blind to, and he had armed her for a battle she never knew she would have to fight. She powered on the burner phone. It took a moment to find a signal. Holding her breath, she dialed the international number for Fontaine and Chen, listed on the letterhead. It was 4 a.m. in New York, but a respectable 10 a.m. in Geneva. The phone was answered on the second ring. Fontaine and Chen, a crisp female voice said in French, "I need to speak to Mr. Chen, Elara." said her own voice a little rusty. "My name is Elara Vance. My client identifier is Odysseus." There was a pause. The name was a key, a code. "One moment, please." A few seconds later, a man's voice, calm and measured, came on the line. "This is Alistair Chen. To whom am I speaking?" "This is Elara Vance. Elara Croft now." There was another slight pause, the sound of keyboard clicks in the background. "Ah, Miss Vance. We have not had the pleasure. Your grandfather was a remarkable man. How may we be of service?" His English was perfect, with a faint British accent from years at Cambridge. Elara took a deep breath, the words catching in her throat. "Mr. Chen, I need to invoke Article 3, Section 4B of the Odysseus Trust." The line went silent for a full 10 seconds. The only sound was the faint transatlantic hiss. Elara's heart pounded. Had she said it right? Did he understand? Finally, Chen's voice returned all traces of pleasantry, gone replaced by a tone of immense gravity and immediate focus. "Understood, Miss Vance. The trigger event has occurred?" "Yes. My husband, Julian Croft, has seized all my financial assets. My bank accounts and credit lines are frozen. I am confined to my home under his direct control. I am pregnant and have no access to my own resources." More typing. "Julian Croft of Croft Consolidated. We are aware of him. The portfolio has been monitoring his activities as a matter of course since your marriage." Elara was stunned. They had been watching Julian all along. "The terms of the trust are now in effect." Chen continued, his voice sharp and efficient. "First, your immediate liquidity. A courier will be dispatched to your location within 12 hours. You will be buzzed from the lobby under the name AV Deliveries. Be ready. The package will contain a debit card linked to a new non-extraditable account in Liechtenstein, seeded with an initial 100,000 euros. It will also contain a secure satellite phone and a laptop. They are untraceable. Use them and only them for all future communication with me." He spoke with such speed and precision that Elara could barely keep up. Second, he went on the active measures. The trust will now allocate a significant portion of its capital to a new directive, the systematic deleveraging and dismantling of Julian Croft's financial holdings. We will need your help. You have intimate access. We need information. Passwords, deal structures, private ledgers, vulnerabilities. Anything that is not public knowledge. Your husband values control above all else. We will use that against him. We will not attack him like a rival firm. We will dissolve his foundations like water seeping into stone." Elara felt a dizzying mix of terror and exhilaration. This was real. This was happening. How much is in the trust?" She asked, her voice barely a whisper. There was a dry chuckle on the other end of the line. "Miss Vance, your grandfather was a very wise investor, and it has been 7 years. Let's just say that the trust's current valuation is substantial. Substantial enough that if Mr. Croft were to know its full extent, he would be the one feeling trapped. What do you need me to do?" "For now, nothing. Continue to play the part of the broken wife. Be meek. Be docile. Let him underestimate you. That is your greatest advantage. Gather what information you can safely. Our team will begin its work immediately. We will be in touch via the secure phone." "Do you understand?" "Yes," she said, her voice firm, a new strength flowing through her veins. "I understand." "Good. Welcome back, Miss Vance," Chen said. Let's get you out of your cage." She ended the call and sat in the darkness, the leather folio in her lap. Julian thought he was the master of the universe, a predator at the top of the food chain. He had no idea that a ghost from the past, a promise made to a young woman by her grandfather, had just marked him as prey. The game had changed, and Elara Croft, the prisoner, was now the architect of her husband's ruin. For the next 3 weeks, Elara lived a double life with a discipline that would have impressed a covert operative. Outwardly, she was the picture of resigned melancholy. She allowed the nurse Julian had hired to take her blood pressure. She ate the prescribed meals of steamed fish and quinoa. She feigned interest in the swatches of fabric for the nursery that Julian's designer presented. She was a ghost in her own home, drifting through the opulent rooms, her expression vacant. Julian, consumed by his own ego and the demands of his empire, saw only what he wanted to see, a problem contained, a variable controlled. Inwardly, Elara was a whirlwind of focused activity. The package from AV Deliveries had arrived as promised. The doorman, accustomed to a constant stream of deliveries from every luxury brand in existence, hadn't batted an eye. Inside a nondescript Chanel box, a perfect piece of camouflage, were the tools of her new life. The sleek, heavy satellite phone, the anonymous black laptop, and the cool metal debit card from a bank in Vaduz. Her clandestine headquarters was the ensuite bathroom of a guest bedroom that was seldom used. It had a solid core door and a noisy ventilation fan that provided excellent cover. Each night after Julian was asleep, she would slip inside, turn on the fan and the shower for good measure, and boot up the secure laptop. Her first conversations with Alistair Chen were tutorials in corporate espionage. He was patient, precise, and utterly ruthless. Julian's entire empire is built on leverage and perception. Chen explained, his voice coming through the encrypted line with perfect clarity. He borrows heavily to finance acquisitions, using the inflated value of his current assets as collateral. The whole structure is a house of cards. If one key support is pulled, the entire thing will tremble. Our job is to find that support. Elara's role was to provide the map. Years of being the silent wife at dinner parties, of half listening to Julian's arrogant monologues about his deals, had filled her head with a trove of information she never realized she possessed. He has a private server in his home office, she told Chen, picturing the sleek black tower humming behind a ventilated grate. He calls it the Citadel. He says it's more secure than the cloud. He backs everything up to it nightly. Does he have a password? He's too arrogant for a simple one. It's a sequence. He uses a small black fob that he keeps on his keychain. It generates a new alphanumeric code every 60 seconds. A 2-factor authentication key. Difficult but not impossible. We would need the fob itself, Chen mused. Elara's mind raced. Julian's keys. They were always with him, except for one time, when he swam. Every morning at 5:30 a.m., he swam laps in the building's private pool for exactly 30 minutes. He left his keys, his wallet, and his phone in a locker. The next morning, Elara rose at 5:15. She put on her workout clothes and for the first time in months went down to the residents-only fitness center. Julian was already in the pool, a sleek machine cutting through the still water. She feigned a series of gentle pregnancy-approved stretches, her eyes locked on the men's locker room door. At 6:01 a.m., he emerged, his hair wet, a towel slung around his neck. He gave her a nod of approval. He liked that she was being proactive about her health, and disappeared back into the elevator. She waited a full minute, her heart hammering. Then she walked calmly into the men's locker room. It was empty. She found his locker number 8, his lucky number. It was secured with a simple combination lock. She smiled grimly. Julian believed complex problems required complex solutions. He would never imagine she knew the simple sentimental code he'd chosen the date of their first meeting. 10:14. The lock clicked open. There they were, his keys, his wallet. She unclipped the small black fob. Working quickly, she pressed it against a small grey device the size of a domino that Chen had sent her. It was a high-speed cloner. A tiny red light on the device blinked, then turned green. It had copied the fob's unique cryptographic signature. She clipped the original fob back onto the keychain, closed the locker, spun the tumblers, and walked out. The entire operation took less than 90 seconds. She was back in the apartment before Julian had even finished his protein shake. That night, she relayed the success to Chen. "Excellent, Miss Vance," he said, his voice humming with satisfaction. "With this, our technicians can replicate the key's algorithm. We will have a window into the Citadel. Now, what is his current obsession?" "Something called the Helios Project," she replied instantly. Julian had been consumed by it for months. It's a massive hostile takeover of a clean energy company, Solar Innovations. He's been secretly accumulating their stock through a dozen shell corporations. He plans to announce the takeover in a month. He says it will be his masterpiece, the deal that makes him a legend. "Hostile takeovers are bloody affairs," Chen noted. "They require powerful allies." "Who are his partners?" Elara closed her eyes, dredging her memory. "He's financing it with a massive loan from a private consortium in Dubai, led by a Sheikh Al-Thani. And his key Wall Street ally is a man named Marcus Thorne at Goldman Sachs. They handle the brokerage side." "Marcus Thorne," Chen repeated slowly. "We know him. A man with expensive tastes and a penchant for gambling on sporting events. A potential vulnerability." Over the next 2 weeks, the Odysseus Trust became a ghost in Julian's machine. Using the cloned key, Chen's team in Geneva slipped in and out of the Citadel server, silent and undetected. They were digital specters, copying files, mapping networks, and tracing the labyrinthine flow of money that propped up the Croft Empire. Elara became the human intelligence. She paid close attention to Julian's moods. She knew when a particular shell company was facing a regulatory hurdle by the tension in his jaw. She knew when a wire transfer was imminent by the way he paced the living room, barking orders into his phone. She would feed these scraps of information, a name, a date, a bank, to Chen, who would weave them into a larger tapestry of financial intelligence. The trust began its attack not with a cannonball, but with 1,000 tiny cuts. An anonymous tip was sent to a German financial regulator about irregularities in a Frankfurt-based shell company, one of the key vehicles for the Solara stock acquisition. The company's assets were frozen pending an investigation tying up hundreds of millions of Julian's capital. He was enraged, blaming German inefficiency, never suspecting the source. Next, a carefully curated dossier detailing Marcus Thorne's undeclared gambling debts was leaked to the compliance department at Goldman Sachs. Thorne was quietly and swiftly removed from his position, severing Julian's primary artery into the Wall Street trading floors. Julian was furious, cursing Thorne's stupidity and recklessness. Then Chen's team, armed with the knowledge of Julian's private ledgers, began a coordinated and anonymous short-selling campaign against Croft Consolidated's publicly traded bonds. They knew exactly where the company was over-leveraged, where the debt covenants were weakest. The bond yields began to spike, making it more expensive for Julian to borrow money. He saw it as market volatility, a reaction to rising interest rates, a sign of rival firms smelling blood. He never once looked at his own home. He grew more volatile, more paranoid. One evening, a priceless Ming vase he had bought at a Sotheby's auction was knocked over and shattered by a maid. Julian flew into an incandescent rage, firing her on the spot and screaming about incompetence. He was a king whose castle was being mysteriously undermined, and so he reinforced the walls, becoming even more of a tyrant to those within his immediate grasp. Elara watched him, her face a mask of sympathy, her heart a block of ice. She would soothe him, bringing him a glass of water, murmuring placating words. He would grab her arm, his grip too tight, his eyes wild. "They're coming for me, Elara. All of them. Petrov, the Chinese. They want to tear down what I've built. But I won't let them." "Of course not, darling," she would whisper. "You're too smart for them." That night, in the sterile silence of the guest bathroom, she logged on for her call with Chen. "He's feeling the pressure," she reported. "He's becoming unstable." "Good," Chen replied. "The foundations are saturated. The structure is weak. It's time to prepare for the final stroke. The Helios project is his pride. We will turn it into his guillotine." Elara looked at her own reflection in the dark screen of the laptop. Her face was pale, her eyes large and shadowed, but there was a hardness in them that hadn't been there before. She was no longer just a victim. She was an instrument of justice, a quiet, patient force of destruction. Julian had tried to freeze her out, to render her powerless. Instead, he had unleashed a power he couldn't comprehend, a ghost forged by a grandfather's love and a husband's cruelty. The first visible tremor struck on a Monday morning. Julian was in his home office, a space he called the cockpit. He was on a conference call with his legal team, finalizing the last details before launching his hostile bid for Solara Innovations. He was arrogant, imperious, and completely in his element. Elara was in the kitchen, ostensibly overseeing the preparation of her morning smoothie, but in reality, she was listening. The kitchen was directly below the office, and a discreet baby monitor intended for the nursery was currently tucked behind a potted orchid, broadcasting the audio from Julian's office to a small receiver she kept in her pocket. It was a trick Chen's team had suggested, a low-tech solution to a high-tech problem. "The financing from Dubai is secure," Julian was saying, his voice booming with confidence. "Sheikh Al-Thani's consortium is wiring the final tranche today. Once it lands, we file the 13D with the SEC and go public. Solara's board won't know what hit them." Suddenly, the triumphant tone vanished. "What? What do you mean, there's a delay?" A pause. Elara held her breath. "What compliance flag? It's a standard wire transfer. Get the bankers on the phone. Get Al-Thani on the phone. I don't care what time it is, in Dubai, you wake him up." The call ended abruptly. A heavy silence followed, then the distinct, sharp sound of a crystal glass being smashed against a wall. Elara flinched, but kept her expression serene as the chef glanced nervously in her direction. 2 hours later, Julian stormed out of his office, his face ashen. He bypassed Elara completely, not even registering her presence, as he stalked towards the bedroom, dialing his phone. "Get me Mikhail Petrov's private number," he snarled at his assistant. "Now." Elara knew what had happened. Chen had warned her this was coming. The Odysseus Trust, through another anonymous tip, had alerted the U.S. Treasury's Office of Foreign Assets Control, OFAC, to a potential violation in the Dubai transaction. The tip suggested with impeccably forged evidence that a small percentage of the consortium's funds could be traced back to a sanctioned Russian oligarch, a man named Mikhail Petrov, Julian's #1 rival. The wire transfer wasn't just delayed. It was frozen solid, tangled in a web of international anti-money laundering regulations that would take months, if not years, to unravel. The fuel for the Helios project had been cut off at the source. Julian's paranoia, which had been simmering for weeks, now boiled over. He was convinced this was a direct attack from Petrov. He saw his rival's hand in everything: the German investigation, Marcus Thorne's downfall, the pressure on his bonds. It was a classic corporate raid, and he was blind to the true enemy. His ego simply couldn't conceive of an attack coming from anywhere but a competing titan. The idea that it could originate from the silent, pregnant woman padding around his apartment was beyond the realm of his imagination. His tyranny in the penthouse intensified. He had the entire apartment swept for listening devices, a team of ex-Mossad security consultants marching through their home. They found nothing, of course. Elara's tools were too sophisticated, and the baby monitor was too innocuous. The failure to find a bug only made him more certain he was dealing with a genius adversary. He started locking the door to his office. He began taking important calls in his car, driving aimlessly through Manhattan for hours. His relationship with Elara became a twisted caricature of concern. He would question her constantly, not about her well-being, but about her conversations. "Did your mother call today? What did she say? Did you talk to your friends? Who were they? What did you talk about?" He would demand, his eyes boring into her. He suspected everyone around him of being a potential leak. Elara played her part to perfection. She seemed frightened by his outbursts, confused by his questions. She cried easily. "Julian, you're scaring me. I don't know anything about your business. I just want our baby to be healthy." Her apparent fragility and ignorance were her shield. The more he descended into a paranoid hell of his own, making the more invisible she became to him as a threat. Meanwhile, the real work was accelerating. With Julian's capital tied up and his primary acquisition strategy in ruins, the Odysseus Trust moved from defense to offense. Chen's team had discovered Julian's Plan B for the Helios project. Buried deep within the Citadel server was a file labeled Project Chimera. It was a contingency plan to fund the takeover using capital siphoned from the pension fund of a manufacturing company Croft Consolidated had acquired 3 years prior. It was illegal, a blatant violation of ERISA regulations, and an act of corporate malfeasance so profound it could lead to prison time. "This is the kill shot," Miss Vance Chen told her during one of their nightly calls, "but we need unequivocal proof that he and he alone authorized this. A digital file can be disavowed. We need his signature on a physical document or a voice recording." Elara's blood ran cold. This was a new level of risk. He keeps all sensitive documents in the office safe. It's biometric. Only his thumbprint can open it. "Then we must find a way to get inside that office," Chen stated simply. The opportunity came in a way Elara could never have predicted. One afternoon, Julian, increasingly erratic and sleep-deprived, confronted her in the living room. He had a printout in his hand, a log of all incoming calls to the penthouse landline. "Who is AV Deliveries?" he demanded, stabbing a finger at the entry from 3 weeks ago. They called the day before the German investigation started. "Who are they?" Elara's heart stopped. She had been so careful, but she couldn't control the building's call logs. She feigned ignorance, her mind racing. "AV, I don't know, Julian. Our flower delivery. Perhaps I get so many things I can't remember. Don't lie to me, he roared, his face contorted with rage. He was a cornered animal lashing out at shadows. Everything is connected. It's all part of Petrov's plan. In his fury, he swept a lamp off an end table. It crashed to the floor. As he turned, he stumbled over the wreckage, his arm flailing out to break his fall. He cried out in pain, clutching his right wrist. It was an ugly, unnatural angle. He had broken it. Chaos erupted. His assistant was called. An orthopedic specialist was summoned for an emergency house call. In the frantic shuffle as Julian was sedated for the pain and his arm was set in a heavy cast, Elara saw her chance. His right arm, his dominant arm, his key to the biometric safe, was incapacitated. That night, as Julian slept a deep, drugged sleep in their bed, his arm propped up on a pillow, Elara slipped into his office. The room was dark, the city lights painting stripes across the floor. She approached the safe, which was hidden behind a minimalist painting. She knew she couldn't open it, but she didn't need to. Chen had anticipated this possibility. He had instructed her on what to look for: a digital recorder, no bigger than a pen, that Julian used to dictate memos. He was too vain to be seen wearing his reading glasses to type everything. Elara found it on his desk, right next to his blotter. She turned it on and scrolled through the audio files. They were mostly mundane: memo to legal note to self, call the Hamptons landscaper. And then she found it. A file created 2 weeks ago. The title was simply Chimera Contingency. She put the recorder to her ear, her hand trembling as she pressed play. Julian's voice filled the silence, crisp and clear. Note to file. Project Chimera. In the event of a failure of the primary financing tranche for the Helios acquisition, I am authorizing the leveraging of surplus assets from the Midwest Manufacturing Pension Fund as detailed in the attached prospectus. This is a temporary bridge loan to be repaid post-acquisition. The risk is minimal, the reward is total. This authorization is mine and mine alone. End note. It was everything. The smoking gun. A confession in his own voice. She connected the recorder to the secure laptop using a tiny cable. The file transferred in seconds. She sent it immediately to Chen. Then she wiped the connection log from the laptop, placed the recorder exactly where she had found it, and slipped out of the office, leaving no trace. Back in the guest bathroom, she received a one-word message from Chen on the encrypted chat checkmate. A wave of relief and terror washed over her. The final piece was in place. She walked to the window of the guest room and looked out at the city and cool. It was no longer a glittering prison. It was a kingdom about to fall. The cracks in the facade were about to become a catastrophic collapse, and she was the one holding the detonator. The end came not with a bang, but with the quiet, devastating efficiency of a perfectly executed plan. It was a Wednesday morning, exactly 1 month after Elara's cards had been declined. Julian, his arm in a black sling, and his mood fouler than ever, was on the phone with his bankers trying to salvage the Helios deal through sheer force of will. He was trying to arrange a new, punishingly expensive line of credit from a hedge fund in Connecticut, a move of pure desperation. Elara sat in the living room, ostensibly reading a book on child development. On her lap, hidden beneath the book, was the secure satellite phone displaying a live encrypted feed from Chen. The message on the screen read, Phase 1 initiated, 9:30 a.m. EST. Stand by. At precisely 9:30 a.m., an email was sent from an untraceable encrypted server in Estonia to a select group of people. The recipients included the lead enforcement attorney at the Securities and Exchange Commission (SEC), the head of the Department of Labor's Pension Oversight Division, and most devastatingly, a Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative journalist at the Wall Street Journal named David Chenier, known for his relentless exposés of corporate fraud. The email was brief and anonymous. It contained a single password-protected attachment. The password was legacy. Inside the attachment was the complete damning story of Project Chimera. There were the internal memos from the Citadel server, the secret prospectuses, the falsified actuarial reports, and the labyrinthine charts showing the planned diversion of pension funds. And at the heart of it all was the audio file Julian Croft, in his own voice, authorizing the illegal act. Elara watched Julian through the open doorway of the living room. She saw the exact moment the world shifted. His phone buzzed with an incoming call. He looked at the caller ID and his face tightened. It was his chief legal counsel. "What is it, Robert?" he snapped. A long pause. "What do you mean? What have I done?" "The journal." "What about the journal?" His face went from pale to ghostly white. He stumbled over to the bank of monitors in his office, his good hand flying across the keyboard. He brought up the Wall Street Journal's website. The headline was just being pushed to the front page. Croft Consolidated, implicated in pension raid scheme. SEC launches, urgent probe. Leaked audio reveals billionaire. Julian Croft's voice. "No," he whispered. It was a strangled, broken sound. "No, no, no." His phone began to ring incessantly. Then his other lines, a cacophony of incoming calls, each one another nail in his coffin. The hedge fund in Connecticut, his terrified board members, his PR team. Chen's feed on Elara's phone updated Phase 2 initiated. Trading halt requested. On the financial news network, playing silently on a nearby television, a red banner flashed across the bottom of the screen. Trading in Croft Consolidated. CFCN. Halted pending news. The fortress had been breached. The ghost in the machine had revealed itself. Julian was a man unraveling in real time. He swept a monitor off his desk, sending it crashing to the floor. He kicked his chair over. He was roaring a primal scream of disbelief and fury. Petrov. It was Petrov. That son of a bitch. He still didn't see it. His colossal ego was his final blind spot. He was so busy looking for an enemy on his own level that he never thought to look down. Elara calmly placed her book and the phone on the couch, stood up, and walked to the threshold of his office. He looked up at her, his eyes what and bloodshot, searching for something, an ally, an anchor. "Elara," he gasped. "They're destroying me. Everything. It's all gone." She looked at him, her expression not of pity, but of cold, clear judgment. She felt nothing. The fear, the love, the subservience, it had all been burned away, leaving only the hard, clean truth of their relationship. "Yes," she said, her voice even. "They are." Something in her tone, in her stillness, finally pierced his paranoid fog. A new dawning horror crept into his eyes. He looked at her truly, looked at her for the first time in years. He saw not the docile wife, but a stranger, a woman with secrets. The call. He whispered, his mind finally making the connection. The call log. AV deliveries. He pieced it together, the letters clicking into place. AV. Arthur Vance. Elara didn't need to confirm it. Her silence was his answer. He stared at her, his mouth agape. The scale of the deception was too vast for him to comprehend. The obedient wife, the beautiful accessory, the vessel for his legacy. She was the architect of his apocalypse. You. He breathed the word full of utter disbelief. It was you, all of it. How Elara walked over to his desk, to the one spot he had cleared in his rage. She placed a single sheet of paper upon the polished wood. It was the only piece of physical evidence she had allowed herself. It was a statement she had requested from Chen that morning, a statement for the Odysseus Trust. It showed no account numbers, no incriminating details. It just showed the trust's name, her name, as the sole beneficiary, and its current market value, a staggering figure that was nearly double what Julian's empire had been worth at its peak. And at the bottom, there was a single-line item under the heading Recent Strategic Allocations, Short Position, Croft Consolidated, CFCN. Julian's eyes scanned the paper. He saw the name. He saw the valuation. And he saw the final brutal checkmate. She hadn't just exposed him. She had bet against him. She had profited from his downfall. The Odysseus Trust had shorted his company into oblivion, and in doing so its own value had skyrocketed. He looked from the paper to her face. The man who controlled everything had controlled nothing. The master of the universe had been undone by a ghost from the past, and a woman he had fatally underestimated. He didn't shout. He didn't rage. All the fight went out of him, replaced by a hollow, echoing emptiness. He slowly sank into his remaining chair, a ruined king on a broken throne. Just then the penthouse doorbell rang, a loud, insistent official sound. Elara walked past Julian without another glance. She went to the front door and opened it. 2 men and 1 woman in dark, conservative suits stood in the hallway. The man in the middle held up his credentials. SEC Enforcement, he said grimly. We have a warrant to seize all documents and electronic devices belonging to Julian Croft. Behind them, the elevator doors opened and 2 uniformed NYPD officers stepped out. Elara stepped aside, holding the door open for them. He's in his office, she said calmly. I believe you'll find everything you need. She walked away, not looking back as they swarmed into her home, into Julian's life. She went to her bedroom and picked up a single packed suitcase that had been waiting in her closet. It contained a few changes of clothes, the secure laptop, and the leather folio her grandfather had given her. It was all she needed. As she walked to the service elevator, she could hear the lead agent reading Julian his rights. His voice was a monotone drone, the final dreary rites for a fallen empire. The sound faded as the elevator doors closed, carrying her down and away, out of the gilded cage, and into the rest of her life. 1 year later. The air in the old stone house didn't smell of white tea and lilies. It smelled of lavender from the fields outside, damp earth after a rain shower, and honey from the wax of old polished wood. The house, a beautifully restored 18th century mass nestled in the hills of Provence, France, was the antithesis of the Fifth Avenue penthouse. It was solid-rooted and quiet. Elara sat on a worn linen sofa, a book lying open in her lap. Sunlight streamed through the French doors, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. The only sound was the gentle cooing of her son, sleeping peacefully in a simple wooden bassinet beside her. She had named him Arthur. He was a beautiful, healthy baby, with her dark hair, and she was certain her grandfather's calm, observant blue eyes. He was not a legacy or an heir to a financial dynasty. He was simply her son, and her love for him was a fierce, quiet, and boundless thing. The past year had been one of careful, deliberate reconstruction. Guided by Alastair Chen, she had vanished from the New York social scene as completely as a ship slipping over the horizon. The Odysseus Trust had performed its final act on her behalf. It had anonymously bought out the remnants of Croft Consolidated for pennies on the dollar during the bankruptcy proceedings. The purchase included several of the company's legitimate assets, including the now liberated Solara Innovations. Elara, as the trust's beneficiary, had become the silent majority owner of a burgeoning clean energy company. She had installed a new ethical board of directors led by the brilliant female engineer who had originally founded Solara before Julian's predatory attack. The company was thriving this time with a mission that went beyond shareholder value. She didn't live the life of a billionaire. The ostentatious wealth Julian had craved now felt vulgar to her. She had sold the penthouse, the Hamptons estate, the diamonds, the cars. The proceeds, along with a significant portion of the trust's capital, were funneled into a new entity she had created, the Vance Foundation, dedicated to funding legal aid for women in coercive relationships and investing in female-led startups. Her grandfather's weapon had been transformed into a tool for creation. Of Julian, she heard only sporadic, grim news through Chen. His fall had been absolute. Stripped of his wealth, buried in lawsuits from shareholders and the government, he was a pariah. The SEC had barred him from the securities industry for life. The Department of Labor's case regarding the pension fund was proceeding to a criminal trial, and a conviction seemed certain. His powerful friends had abandoned him instantly. His name, once a synonym for success, was now a cautionary tale whispered on Wall Street. One afternoon, Chen forwarded her an article from a New York tabloid. It featured a recent grainy photograph of Julian. He was leaving a courthouse, no longer in his bespoke suits, but in an ill-fitting off-the-rack one. He looked haggard, gaunt, and a decade older. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a hunted, haunted look in his eyes. The headline was cruel and concise. Broken the fall of Julian Croft. Elara looked at the photo for a long moment, felt a flicker of something, not pity, but a profound sadness for the man he could have been, and then deleted the message. He was a chapter she had finished reading. Her life was now defined by small, tangible joys. The weight of Arthur in her arms, the taste of fresh bread from the village boulangerie. A walk through the lavender fields as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. She was not the imprisoned Mrs. Croft, or even the vengeful Elara Vance. She was just Elara, a mother, a quiet businesswoman, a woman who had fought her way out of the dark and into the light. She looked down at her sleeping son. She would tell him the story one day, not the story of revenge, but the story of resilience. She would tell him about his great-grandfather, Arthur Vance, a man who understood that true strength was not about controlling others, but about ensuring the freedom of those you love. She would teach him that a legacy isn't built with steel and glass and leveraged buyouts, but with integrity, courage, and purpose. A warm breeze drifted in through the open doors, carrying the scent of a future that was entirely her own. She had been trapped, penniless, and pregnant. Now she was free, powerful, and a mother. Julian Croft had tried to destroy her, but in doing so he had inadvertently forged her into the woman she was always meant to become, and that she knew was the greatest victory of all. Elara's story is a chilling reminder that the most opulent cages are still cages. It's a story of how devastatingly a powerful man can underestimate a woman and how intelligence and hidden strength can become the ultimate weapons. It isn't just about revenge. It's about reclaiming a narrative, securing a future, and turning the tools of oppression into instruments of liberation. The battle between new money arrogance and old money cunning played out not on a trading floor, but in the heart of a marriage with a child's future hanging in the balance. If you found this story of resilience and strategic genius as compelling as we did, please hit that like button to show your support. Share it with someone who loves a story of epic karma, and make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next deep dive into real-life drama. What part of Elara's plan impressed you the most? Let us know in the comments below.